It's Gripe Session time with your host, George Wanaka.
It's about nothing.
Discussing everything from real estate, current events, a little bit of everything, and the annoying little things that just tick you off.
You can't handle the truth.
What? You didn't know?
Here's your host, George Wanaka.
Your ass better call somebody.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's edition of the Gripe Session podcast. Today, we have a very, very special guest. So as we all know, for anybody that's watched this podcast or listened to this podcast for any length of time, we know that I love going to Mets fantasy camp and doing that for a number of years so far. And I met this guy the last year or two, and I have some sort of stories with my guest. One of them he probably doesn't remember, which I've talked to him about for a while. But I was so happy when he agreed this year to be able to come on the podcast, and that is former New York Mets manager and Major League Baseball manager, Mr. Terry Collins. TC, tell everybody what's happening.
Well, it's not much. It's a nice warm day down here in Florida, and when we get off the show, I'm heading out to the golf course.
That's great.
That's how I enjoy my days.
So not only are you rubbing it in that you're in Florida and 80-degree temperature, but you're rubbing it in that I can't play golf because up here in New York it's 40-something degrees and I'm freezing. So, but that being said, Terry, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast today, coming on, just hanging out, and kind of go from there. So first and foremost, tell everybody a little bit about how you got started in baseball, your baseball career, and how it obviously brought you over to the Mets.
Well, I was like most guys. I was an athlete growing up, and my father never pushed me into sports, but he was a very, very good athlete himself. And I kind of fell in love with baseball. I'm not a real big guy, and baseball at the time was the one sport where little guys could play, and nobody ever second guessed, how big you were. So I played a lot of baseball growing up. I went to college on a scholarship at Eastern Michigan. We won a national championship there. I had a chance to sign after my junior year and finish. I'm going to finish school first, and went back and then signed after my senior year. I played 10 years in the minor leagues, and then finally got my chance to start managing in the minor leagues with the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I worked my way up to AAA in a short period of time. I was very lucky and very blessed to have good players. I managed 9 years in AAA, 6 with the Dodgers, 3 with the Pirates. And when Jim Leland finally gave me a coaching opportunity to be on his staff in Pittsburgh in 1992, the year we went to the playoffs against the Braves, and 93, we lost Bonds and we lost Doug Drabek and a few other guys, and we weren't quite as good. And then 94, I got interviewed and got the job as the manager in Houston, where I spent 3 years. Got fired in Houston, 3 second-place finishes, wasn't good enough. So I got hired by the Angels. For 3 years, I resigned after my third year, moved on to scouting, and then became the minor league director of the Dodgers, the job I loved. We had tremendous organization, put several players in the big leagues during that span of 5 years. And then I had a chance to go back into managing, and I went to Asia. I went to Japan for 2 years, came back, got hired again by the Mets to run their minor leagues for a year as the field coordinator. And then the next year I got the job as the manager when Sandy took over as the GM. And I was blessed and spent 7 great years in New York. And after 17, the age and travel caught up to me, and it was time to take a step back. And now I have a great time. I love going to the fantasy camp. I love to talk to Mets fans. I love to talk baseball, and there's no better place than to go to the Mets fantasy camp and see how excited you guys are, and certainly to be down there and mixing with all the former players, and it's really a fun place. And so here I am today.
Awesome. So, we talked about fantasy camp, and you just kind of went to it. And one of the things that we always do on this podcast is we always give credit, the main parts of the credit for fantasy camp, which actually turns into a couple of campers have actually now rechristened it Mets Family Camp, because all of the campers kind of become like family. And it gets, I have conversations with coaches, throughout the whole course of the year, people that I used to have on my wall, and in some cases I still do have on my wall. But it's become that family. And we give a lot of the credit, obviously, to Doug Dickey, who does a tremendous job. I think Doug, who's been on this podcast, has had more shout outs on this podcast than pretty much anybody. And everybody says, well, who is Doug Dickey? And I'm like, well, that is the question that everybody wants to know, a Star Wars aficionado. But anyway, going back to camp for a minute, I ask the coaches all of the same conversations is, when you come to camp, and obviously you see us as Mets fans, and we're living the boyhood dream, right? But you've been able to see people that have done this, and obviously yourself has done this for a living. Talk about the differences. Well, no, we all know what the differences are between us and the people that have done this for a living, obviously, and some more than others. But talk about the different kinds of experiences in regards to that. As to, I know a lot of the stories probably around baseball kind of center on the same, silly things that go on in our dugouts is probably some of the stuff that goes on in
right. Major
league dugouts and things of that nature. But kind of talk about that camp experience. And when you were in the show, in the majors, if you will, did the actual players nowadays know about fantasy camp? And would that be something that you would do if you were still in the majors, to say, you know what, I'll come down and hang out with these fans nowadays?
Well, those are all great questions. When I was with the Dodger organization, which really they're the ones who gave me my opportunity to manage and, develop. And I went to several Dodger fantasy camps in Vero Beach. We had Hall of Fame camps. We had obviously just Dodger like we do with the Mets. But I saw the excitement, the energy of the fans, to put that uniform on and for 6 days or 7 days be a big league player. It doesn't matter, the fact that, hey, look, obviously, guys weren't Sandy Koufax. There's no Sandy Koufaxes coming out of the camp, but just the love of the sport, the respect that the fans have for the game, and no more than that is in the city of New York. That is a tremendous baseball town, be it. I mean, George, I'm down here in Florida and we're filled with New Yorkers. And I can't tell you how many times I've met somebody. They said, hey, I hear aren't you Terry Collins and former manager of the Mets? And I say, yeah. And they say, well, I'm a Yankees fan. But, and that's New York. You're a Yankees fan or you're a Mets fan. And I'm just glad you're a baseball fan, because I think that's what it is in New York. And that's where the passion comes from. So, yeah, when I managed the Mets, I'm sure you saw, I used to come by once or twice just to talk to the campers. And I think it's important for the campers to understand that, hey, look, we're just guys. We have a job to do. My job was in professional baseball. Obviously, I wasn't talented enough to be a star player. Those guys that were, they're just, as you've met Doc or Mookie or any of the other guys, they're just guys too. They love the game. They love the fact that the fans love the game, and you guys come and you treat them with such respect. And you know what? And all we've done is what our jobs were. And I think that has to continue today. So when I go to these camps, I want those campers to, ask me whatever they want. I want them to know what, some of this behind the scenes stuff that you really can't talk about during the seasons. Yeah. You don't want the opposition to know that, hey, so-and-so's got a bad leg, or, this guy doesn't want to play tonight because he's mad at the bench coach or mad at the manager or mad at the hitting coach. That's the stuff that, you can answer questions today, years and years later, and say, here's what happened. And all of a sudden you'll see the light in the campers' eyes saying, holy cow, I really didn't realize that kind of stuff goes on. Well, it does go on. As you said, the funny stuff that goes on in the dugout. When Bartolo hit the home run and all the guys went out of the dugout and, left by himself, coming around the field, that kind of stuff, the campers do that stuff. And so it's a definite correlation between the fans' love of the game, the players' love of the game. And when you bring them together, that's what makes a great camp.
Yeah. I mean, and we talk about the dugout, but also as the expression goes, the shenanigans that go on around the locker room areas at times is, with Joe Boo's locker. And yes, there is a Joe Boo's locker from Major League. For those of you that have not been to camp. But I've been very fortunate, quite honestly, and I say fortunate, although he might not think it is, but to be on the same. I've had Tank as my Todd Pratt as my coach every single year I've been in fantasy camp. And normally some people get drafted by different people. And I'm like, I've always found that to be great because Tank and I have a very, very similar personality. Just very joking, but there's times you can't figure out if they're joking or not because it's dead serious. And then the smile breaks out. You're like, yeah, okay, I kind of thought that one. I figured that one that was coming. So, but it's camp is, and I can never. I tell people all the time when you go to camp, I sell for a living, obviously being in real estate. I cannot sell the experience, the camp experience, and I could sell as best as anybody else can. But until you go there and experience, it's an undersell. And my best part about camp now is watching the rookies come in like I came in and seeing that uniform hanging for the first time and being like, wow, this is pretty damn cool. So, and obviously, and this year we actually had a major leaguer down in camp who was rehabbing. Unfortunately, he got released not too far after that in Sean Reed Foley. But talk about some of the hijinks that went on. Sean actually had gone through because he hadn't shaved, so nobody really recognized him with the mustache. He went around and was picking up uniforms and acting like a clubby, and nobody knew who he was. So, he's an architect. I'm like, no, I got it. It's good. And then finally was sitting there having a couple of drinks and he introduced himself to me. I'm like, wait a second. So, and he was having a pretty good time. So, camp is such a great experience. And I implore anybody that's thinking about it to definitely find a means at some point to do it at least once, because if you do it at least once, you're probably going to try to figure out how to do it at least twice. And
George, I'm going to tell you that same thought that those rookies, when they walk in there for the first time and they see their uniform in their locker with their name on it, make no mistake about it. Every rookie that comes to Major League camp, even though he knows he has no chance of making the team, when he walks in that clubhouse, he's a big league player. And when he sees that uniform, locker next to Jake DeGrom or Pete Alonso or David Wright, by the way, you're a big leaguer. And that sense of euphoria is in every rookie that's a professional athlete who may be a star one of these days. But they feel that same thrill when they walk into their first camp.
That's awesome. So, well, we're going to get right back to the Gripe Session podcast. But before we do, we got to have a word from our sponsors over here at bestguyever.com. Make sure you never forget an important date ever again. Never forget any important dates with your wife, your daughter, your sister, your mother, or your mother-in-law for that matter. We want you here to be the bestguyever.com. And by the way, bestguyever.com helps your local small businesses. So it is a win-win for you. Not only can you be the bestguyever.com for those people that love you, but you can also support your local small businesses because bestguyever.com only deals with local small businesses. That's right. So make sure you get to www.bestguyever.com and subscribe. And by the way, let them know that you found out from us from the Gripe Session podcast. And because you're coming from the Gripe Session, we were able to get you a little bit of a deal for them as well. What's that deal, you say? Well, once you register, put in Gripe Session in the promo code. That's Gripe Session. And you're going to get 1 year free subscription to be the best guy ever. That's right. 1 free subscription by putting in Gripe Session in your promo code, and you're going to get a year for free. You can't have it any better than that. So make sure you go check out bestguyever.com and let them know the Gripe Session pulled you in. And now back to our local program. So moving right along into some of the baseball aspects of, obviously, when I have baseball coaches come on here and have conversations with them. One of the things I always ask, especially my last couple of podcasts that I've done with some of the recent coaches, is what are your feelings on the current changes to the game? I know I have strong feelings about it as being kind of a baseball purist myself. I didn't think, this game has been around for hundreds of years and, there's been nothing wrong with it because it's still here and around, but trying to bring in the new generation, I think they're sometimes trying a little bit too hard. As somebody who's been in the game and has been around the game pretty much probably your whole life, what are your feelings on a lot of these new changes that are going on?
Well, we can start with obviously the majority of them started with COVID because of some of the issues with the travel and everybody in the same space. But when you look at the rules changes, the runner at second base that had to stop. I saw it in the minor leagues. And I understood it in the minor leagues because you're limited to the number of players you have. Some days, there are sometimes in the minor leagues, you may only have one or two relief pitchers because you had an 18-inning game the day before. I get it. But in the big leagues, I don't get it. I mean, guys get paid. Guys are getting paid a lot of money to win and to be in certain situations. So the game, that changed the game for me. And to lose a game, have a guy that have Jake DeGrom pitch 9 innings, give up no runs, and then lose a game on the runner at second, and let's just say they do bunt him over, and you got to bring now you're bringing the infield in, and some guy hits a jam shot over the infield in the 10th inning, and you lose a baseball game that costs your team hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in some cases. I don't like it. I think that's ridiculous. Now, the pitch clock, yeah, it can speed the game up, but nothing. It works in the minor leagues because they don't have television. And they don't have to have 2 minutes and 30 seconds between every inning or every half inning for commercials. I understand it, but it's not going to change the Major League Baseball game that much. Just because a minor league game now averages 2 hours and 30 minutes due to this speed up stuff. Hey, look, I think the pace of the game needs to be picked up a little bit. The pitching coach, it takes a minute and a half to walk to the mound. There's no excuse for that for me. You know what? Get out there, get your conversation. But I know it's about half of them are stall tactics while you're getting somebody warmed up in the bullpen. I used to watch, Donnie Mattingly was the best at it. Joe Girardi was great at it one time in New York. He didn't have anybody warmed up. He took the pitcher out and he had a pinch hitter that took 4 minutes to get in the batter's box. So, but those were all parts of the game at the big league level that probably need to change a little bit. But you know what? To change the majority of the rules, no, the game's fine. And by the way, in that city, it may be different in other cities. In that city, the fans today were born and raised on baseball, and they like the game the way it's played. Due to the fact they have their phones in the stands, they can do whatever they want on their phones. Everybody says, well, now the technology, people don't want to sit for 3 hours. They sit everywhere for 3 hours on their phones. So it doesn't matter if it's at a baseball game or not. But for me, I think the game is still great. The analytical side of the game, I think, has gotten out of control because I look at it this way, George. You know who created analytics? The best players. The best players. You want everybody to have the same spin rate on their curveball that Koufax had. That ain't going to happen. There's just guys who can spin it and guys who can't. And if you think you can teach somebody to have a certain spin rate that Seth Lugo has, or you're not going to have, or exit velocities. To think that Luis Guillorme is going to have the same exit velocity that Pete Alonso has, you're kidding yourself. And so, I think they're good coaching tools, but I think now they've gotten the players' minds so much that the way to play the game has gotten away from, what it takes to just win a baseball game. They're also worried about what their numbers look like at the end of the day on the stat sheets, that they forgot that, hey, look, get a runner over and get a runner in still works in a lot of one-run games. So that kind of stuff, I accept it. I understand it. But that's why I'm sitting in my seat here today and not someplace else.
I hear you. What's speaking about changes to the game, obviously being in the AL and the NL, you had the DH and then we didn't have the DH, but now they're talking about the complete DH. And to me, that kind of defeated the purpose of the difference between the leagues. Can you talk a little bit about your opinion on the DH and how it's now turning into a universal conversation?
Well, I will tell you what, I spent a lot of years in the minor leagues. When I was playing in the minor leagues, the pitchers hit. Then the DH came along, and at the major league level, they're now jobs. There are now big jobs. I mean, how long we watched the Mets all summer long, and in the last 2 months, all the conversation was, well, they should have went out and got a DH, a big time bat. Well, there's, today there's guys who might have slowed down physically and yet can still hit. So those jobs opened up. And by the way, I know the fans got a big kick out of watching Bartolo Colon hit. I didn't. He didn't want to hit. He didn't like hitting. To have Jake hit, he was a good hitter. Noah was a good hitter. Matz was a good hitter, but they worked at it. Bartolo didn't want to hit. So, and then you're starting to lose pitchers now because they got to run the bases and they're pulling muscles, or they got to score from first and they're sitting on the bench and they're out of gas. I mean, they want to come. Fans today, I think, want to see the star players do what they do, and that would be let the pitcher pitch. And there's a lot of times now you're down a run in the seventh inning. Maybe your star pitcher's got 75 pitches, and he comes up with the bases loaded. You got to take him out. You got to pinch hit for him, and so you get your chance of having your team win, I think, changes. So I accept the DH. I love the National League game. I thought there was more strategy involved. There was more moves you had to make, but I get it today. And I have no problem with the universal DH.
So leading into the fact with the NL, part of the reason that I personally, as an NL guy, because my one side of my family, meaning all the girls in my family, my wife and my two daughters, are Yankee fans, and me and my son are diehard Mets fans. The one side I always used to make that argument was the National League could at least police itself, because pitchers had to get into the box 90% of the time.
Correct.
Right. So that was why I liked it, because it was back to old school baseball and talking about, if you do something silly, you're going to get in that box, you're going to have to face that other guy.
Right.
Although we're not seeing too much of the policing, and quite honestly, most obviously one of your biggest memories, obviously, is as Mets manager, as what went on in the series with the Dodgers, when you were trying to police the situation and have the players kind of police the situation that's kind of got a little bit out of control and untenable. Can you talk a little bit about that moment and how baseball is trying to take the players out of policing things of themselves? Because I think, in my opinion, as a fan, or as an old school fan, as I like to say, I would rather the players deal with something as opposed to having somebody who's just watching from an office say, well, we're not going to allow this to happen at this point any longer. Can you talk a little bit about that? And obviously that situation where you are in obviously Mets lore with that entire conversation.
Yeah, George, I will tell you, again, that's where the game has evolved into a different direction. When I first got to the major leagues as managing, the umpires, if you had a situation where one of your players got hit with a pitch and it kind of looked like maybe it was intentional, the umpires actually would tell you during a controversy, during maybe the benches cleared or whatever, the umpire would come to you and say, you got one chance, you got one shot, then it's over. Then I'm going to put an end to it. Well, today, because of the number of bench clearing situations that have occurred in recent years, and some of them are ugly, that they said, we got to stop this. We got to stop this retaliation. Well, you're not going to. These guys, you know what? They're not kids. They're professionals. And you know what? Winning and their jobs and their reputations are on the line. And, to be a good teammate once in a while when you're pitching and one of your guys gets drilled, you got to protect him. You got to protect the rest of your teammates. And the umpires at one time got it. And now they're being taught otherwise. Hey, we got to nip this before it even gets started. Well, that's what happened with the Dodgers when Chase broke Tejada's leg on a ugly bad slide, which should have been an automatic double play. I'm not saying he should have been ejected. Okay. That was a bad slide. It should have been a double play. The inning should have been over. But, so now our guys, one of their players just had his leg broke. And by the way, it might have down the road, it might have really been a big deal for us in the World Series. But so now we've got to do something about it. Well, we don't see Chase Utley again in the playoffs. We played him 3 more games. He never played. So, the next time we see him, something's done. Now, Noah threw the ball behind Chase, which probably, the fact that he threw it so far behind him, no big league pitcher misses that bad. So that's what I'm sure.
I was going to ask the question, how pissed were you that he didn't hit him actually and that whole thing happened?
Well, that's what I told him when we were in the clubhouse after we both were ejected. I said, you could have at least, put a bruise on the guy. You throw 100. And by the way, I know Chase Utley very well, and he knew something was coming. He knew it. And I will also tell you, with Chase Utley, if we would have hit Chase Utley, he'd have ran to first base. He'd have taken his medicine and went to first base like he's supposed to. Now, they might retaliate the next inning. I'm not saying they aren't, but I know Chase was a professional, a real professional, and he got it. So to have Noah ejected by an umpire that wasn't even around the year before got a little bit carried away from me. So, and I wasn't mad at Tom Hallion. I mean, that's why I said, you got to give us a shot. And Tom said, well, you had your shot. When We didn't have a shot. And so that's what kind of got messed up in the whole situation. But yeah, the days of that retaliation, I think they're coming to an end.
Yeah. Unfortunate, as the expression goes, you want to have sometimes have them police themselves, but you could have that conversation based off of, okay, this is what's going on. We're not going to have the bench clearing stuff, but in the same breath, don't get carried away with it and kind of go from there. But you know what? I think now that when you see with all of the money that's involved and invested in these players, they're also trying to, curb everything, which to me takes some of the passion out of the game at times, unfortunately. But
and George, it does. But that's where, again, due to the fact that the pitching has changed so much, and now by the way, for so many years, guys put stuff on their fingers to get a better grip on the ball. Guys were still hitting 40 and 50 and 60 homers, okay, and guys were still hitting 350. It just helped them control the ball a little bit better. Well, now the idea is to throw as hard as you can up in the zone because everybody has an uppercut swing. So you got to pitch up in the zone to get guys out. Well, guess what? The higher you go in the zone, the closer to the head you get. And guys throwing 100 miles an hour up and in, and guys are getting knocked down and they're getting furious about it. Well, you know what? Stop it. You got to control, and that's where the game has gotten out of. And that's why I said, I watched a lot of games, and I've talked to a number of the guys on the Mets, and they say, hey, the balls aren't very good anymore. They don't rub them up enough. There's not enough grip on them. And I will tell you what, you can go to any hitter in the big leagues, any of them, and if they said they would like to face Max Scherzer or Jacob deGrom throwing 100 miles an hour up and in, they're going to tell you no. Let them put up whatever grip they want, because I want them to control. I do not want those guys to let that ball get away, because we have seen in the past is some strange instances of what happens when you get hit in the face. That's why everybody's wearing all the face masks now. But I just think that stuff, and I just hope the game kind of reverts back to where, hey, let these guys be themselves, play the game right. I've said for a long time, the pitchers can't do anything on the ball, but the hitters can wear batting gloves and pine tar and wrap their bats now to get grips on things so that they have better control of the bat. And yet you don't let the pitcher have any control. That to me doesn't make any much sense.
I mean, half of them go up to the plate looking like Iron Man with all of the stuff on their arms and everything else and the stuff on their shins. And I'm going, wait a second. Like, when did you say, what are they going to start walking up to? And medieval armor all of a sudden, and it's there were pitchers years ago, George, and you were afraid to get in the batter's box sometimes. You knew they were a little wild, and so you didn't crowd the plate. Now the guys are right on top of the plate. They're protecting the outside path because that's where the majority of the pitches where for years and years, if you can throw the knee high down and away, your chances to win games are increased. So, and guys are on the plate because they're protected here, and so they're a little, they're a little braver. And I understand that because I think the safety of the players is certainly important. But one of the reasons why safety is important is to let the pitcher have a little something to hold on to. Yeah. Well, and not only that, but because with all of the adjustments that are making for hitters nowadays, people don't understand, even at a very, very young age. I mean, my son plays travel baseball, and there's times that I've watched him protect his own guys and on his team as a lefty, and I've watched him. I've looked at him and I said, "Did you do that? Did you hit him on purpose?" And he looked at me and goes, "No," but then a little smile creeps across his face, and I'm going, okay, good. That I have no problem with that. I was like, as long as your coach doesn't have a problem with it. He goes, no, he told me he made it look good in front of the other coach. And then he grabbed me afterwards. He goes, you protected your people. I got no problems with that. Hey, we're just going to take a real quick break from the Gripe Session. We're going to get right back to it, but we want to bring you another word from one of our sponsors here, which is SearchStattenIsland.com. Yes, one of the things that I do every single day is I'm a real estate practitioner. I am a licensed realtor. I am a appraiser. I'm also a mortgage broker. So why do you ask any of those questions? Well, quite frankly, because if you have any questions on real estate in any part of the country, all you have to do is reach out to me. Go to www.searchstattenisland.com or find me on the social media platforms. And there's a very good opportunity that I'll be able to help you regardless of whether or not if you're in New York where I'm home based, or if you're someplace out in, whether it be Utah or Texas or somebody out there. There's a very good chance that I will be able to help you regardless, because I have contacts throughout the country and I would be able to make sure my clients are always taken care of. So make sure you check out www.searchstatanisland.com. And now back to our program. Even at the youthful level, I'd like to hear what your opinion is on travel ball and a lot of these young kids that are playing baseball nowadays. I've watched over the years, and obviously, my son plays travel baseball, and I've coached him, and I've coached a lot of young kids in Little League and things of that nature. And I've watched more and more kids only play one sport for a certain amount of time, right? And try to get better at it. And they get their trainers and to get their all of these other things and playing these tournaments and get all of that kind of stuff. I had a conversation with Turk Wendell about a year ago. We were talking about travel baseball, and his motto was, let him play everything, because baseball muscles are one thing, but you got to build everything else up and that's what other sports kind of do. What's your interpretation as somebody who's obviously done this with all of the travel baseball and recruiting things and things, which I'm going through right now, coincidentally, with my son for looking for colleges. But talk about that whole aspect of the younger, generation and kind of the differences between them and what you went through back then.
Well, I will tell you, George, I didn't have any children, so I'm talking completely out of school. So I've heard about the travel. I do not understand how parents can absorb those types of costs all the time. They're traveling all over the place. I do believe you got to play to get better, but I also believe let them play whatever sport they want to play. You've got to become an athlete. You have to be able to understand quickness. You have to understand the athletic positions and how to control your body more. And to play just baseball, I don't think it necessarily teaches you just that. I think, and again, there are guys who are talented, and I get it, but everybody thinks their child is going to be a major league player, and that's not true. And you're going to get, I've seen a lot of it in the past where, I want my son to play travel baseball. So he gets on one of these travel teams. He doesn't play. He's the fourth best pitcher or the third best pitcher, whatever it might be. And he doesn't get to pitch like he would if he was in a league playing. And so, when we grew up, we played all sorts of baseball. We played as much as we could. When I was a junior in college, I played in that following summer. I played 7 days a week in three different leagues. Played every single day because that was the only way to get better. And at the same time, we did other things because, even in college, they made us play basketball so we could learn to shift and move back and forth, control our bodies and learn how to react in both directions. And I just think to be a more accomplished athlete makes a big difference. And I would let any parent say, let your son play whatever he wants. If he's good enough, he'll end up going someplace where he can play. And I say that today to parents. I talk to parents a lot about their kids going to college, and they all want them to go to a Division I school. Well, I was on 5 state championship teams in Michigan when I growing up, and 4 of my teammates who were very, very good baseball players, they all went to Division I schools, and 2 years later they didn't play anymore. And I went to a NAIA school, played every day as a freshman on the varsity, played summer baseball in these big college leagues, and now I'm the guy who ended up getting to the big leagues. So, I just think, again, if you love the game enough, you just got to go out and play it, find wherever you can play because someone's watching. I tell players, even in professional baseball, when you walk on that field, someone's watching. So practice correctly, play correctly, and you know what? Show your skills off every night. If you have foot speed, then at some time during that game, show off your foot speed so that scout can check that off because you never know who you're going to impress and to give you that opportunity to keep playing.
Yeah. That's it's so funny. I watch a lot of, even now even in Little League where, people are talking about, what high school they're going to go to and they're going to, trying to get them into colleges. And I'm like, they're 12 years old. They're not even out of high school yet. Like, what do some kids are going to, my biggest complaint is some people, I believe, actually take their kids' love of the game out of it because they're pushing them and they're pushing them and they're pushing them. And if that's not what they want to do, well, then that's not what they want to do. So,
right.
just
agree.
just because and it's funny because I've had this own conversation with my own son who loves the game of baseball, just completely loves it. And I keep explaining to him, I go, at some point, somebody tells you it's time to stop, where you're not going to be able to play anymore. So if you still want to be around the game at that point, which he still does because he wants to get involved in that sort of thing, I said, well, that's another way that you can be involved in the game that you love and use that as a career as well. So just because you don't want to pull all of that love out of the game and the passion out of the game, because it's one of the best games that is out there, personally, as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. And again, I think you're right. Look, all you can do is be there to back your child up and to let them enjoy it. Went to a Little League game years ago, and it was the first opening day of this Little League, and one of these leagues that asked me to come out. I was managing in the big league, said, "Can you come out to see opening day?" I said, "Yeah." So I went out to the first day. I threw the first pitch out, and the game started. Of course, everybody's going to play on a Saturday morning. They're all going to get their big crowd. And the little kid on the mound walks the first three guys he faces in this game. Of course, all the parents are yelling at him, and the coaches are yelling. One coach walked into the dugout, and he told his players, "Don't swing. Don't wait. I don't want anybody swinging. This guy can't throw it over the plate." And I said, "So we're teaching guys not to swing?" Little League. That's one of the only fun parts about it is hitting.
I have heard that. Unfortunately, I've been on the other side of stuff like that, and I've just looked and go, "Really?"
Yeah, I went home.
You wonder what the problem is, right?
I agree.
But that's a whole nother conversation. But so one of the things that I've told a lot of people in the past is one of my first, and quite honestly, my fondest recollection of you, not just necessarily you managing and the issue with Noah and that sort of situation, was my family does a baseball tour. We started doing a baseball tour but prior to COVID, and then COVID obviously put a damper on that. So we've still got some stadiums left. And the first game that we started this baseball tour was a game out in Pittsburgh, and the Mets were playing. Okay. So we were doing our stadium tour field prior to the game. And my son and I started then, it continues to go on now. Anytime we go to any field, doesn't make a difference what it is, our Mets jerseys are on, regardless of where we went. We've done it in Atlanta, we've done it in Boston, we've done it in Yankee Stadium, which that's some fun, but that's a whole different conversation. And really nobody's ever really given us an issue. So we're down on the field and they're giving us that whole tour, et cetera, et cetera. It's before the game. And we're taking a picture in the background of the field. And all of a sudden, I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's you. And said to me, "Appreciate you, thanks for coming out and supporting the team," and shook my hand. I went, "Oh, appreciate it," and kind of went from there. And it didn't even register to me that it was you. And my son looked at me, now he's 16, and he goes, "Dad, you know who that was?" And I go, "No, who was it?" "That was Terry Collins. It was the manager." I go, "Because you didn't have a hat on, you had just a warm-up shirt, and you must have been jogging around the field or whatever it was." And I like, "Oh my God." And before we could take a picture, you're already gone. I'm like, holy cow. My now 16-year-old son still talks about that moment. And it's all of these years later, which I'm actually going to put that photo up in this video when it hits. But can you talk about, and that's just one of the memories that it comes down to this game and the American pastime, which we call it, is the memories that you have sometimes with your family. Now, that was a memory that you in all likelihood probably have done that 100 times. So a bunch of people and stuff like that probably do not remember it at that point either. But to give families and kids memories like that, can you talk about that type of an experience and how that is for somebody like yourself that's been part of this game?
Well, thank you for the story. But I will tell you this: I do respect the game, and I respect the fans, because that's who supports the game. That's who creates the atmosphere for all the players to have a great time. and to take 1 minute out of your day to walk up and thank somebody for coming out and supporting a team, or get your picture taken, or sign an autograph for some little kid, knowing that down the road sometime, he's going to say, geez, that guy's, and it's for me, it's just something to give back to the fans, because I know that this is that's what it's about. I know if I was in your shoes, to have Sparky Anderson stop and say hi to me. By the way, when I was managing the big league, Sparky called me over to the side, and I felt the same way you did, because, and that's what, to me, what the game is about. And it bothers me when I see guys don't have the time to say thank you to the fans. And I understand there's busy times. I get that. But just to say hi, I mean, when I'm in New York, George, and I walk down the street and someone will come up and stop me, it's a minute. It's a minute out of your day to make someone else's day better. And I don't think that's not much to ask out of a professional athlete.
That's right. That's absolutely awesome. I think you saw Jeff on in down in the thing before fantasy camp, which was kind of funny and cool all on the same point. And Jeff's another one of the fantasy campers, a real good guy. So let's talk about next season coming up with the Mets. Where do you think, well, obviously we have free agency obviously going on right now. Obviously we did make one major signing with Diaz coming back in Narco, and we'll be hearing Narco for the next couple of years in Shea Stadium, Shea Stadium. Kind of now I'm dating myself a little bit, but with that being said, where do you see, from a free agent perspective, do you see us retaining most of our guys again? And if that's the case, where do you see us from an organizational standpoint? If not, what kind of team do you think we're going to have next year? Obviously, it's going to depend a lot on these free agents.
Right. Well, it's going to start, obviously, George, with the pitching. I mean, you've lost, of your 5-man rotation, I think 4 are gone. Now that you've got, Max is back. I don't know if Bassett's, but I know Carrasco's back. So you've got 2 of your 5 guys. So those are 3 big holes you got to fill. And I will tell you this, I know Steve Cohen well enough. He's going to fill them. He's going to fill those holes. I don't know with who, but you've got a great core with Frandor, Alonso, McNeil, Marte. You've got a great core of players. And I think now you just got to fill in around them, find a couple of guys to help Diaz in the bullpen. And I think the Mets are going to be fine. I think Buck does a great job running the bench, running the team. But I know one thing, Steve Cohen is not, he's a huge fan. He wants the team to do well. And I think nothing's going to stand in the way of the Mets being a competitive team next year.
I think, and it's funny you mentioned Uncle Stevie, as he's been known to a lot of the Mets fans nowadays. Actually, he would be a great, as a fan, I think he would completely love coming down to fantasy camp at some point. Hint, hint, Uncle Stevie, if you happen to watch this, it's a good time. He'd be the man of family. But that being said, do you think DeGrom comes back? Do you think Nimmo comes back? Do you have any insight as to where you think that situation goes? I mean, I know it's an ever evolving situation. One day you hear a report of one thing, the next day you hear a report of something different, and vice versa. So, do you think that we get, Jake back? Do you think we get Nimmo back? Because I think most Mets fans, I think, love Nimmo because he's a homegrown guy. Same thing with Jake, that they're both 2 homegrown guys that we'd love to obviously see them finish their careers in there. What do you think about the prospect of both of those guys coming back? Well,
I think Jake's coming back. I really do. I think Jake's. I talked about this in the fantasy camp. I was there the day Jake and David Wright were talking about staying with one team their entire career and how cool that would be. And I think Jake still has that in the back of his mind. I think Jake will come back. Brandon, I don't know. I have no idea. This is his first tour, and this is, he had a great year. And, a lot of times those kind of guys, they got to exploit the great year because you don't know how many more you're going to have. And so, and he's made himself into an outstanding player, and he's just an outstanding human being also. So if the opportunity is to bring them both back, I think the Mets fan base would be very, very excited. But in today's world and today's world of free agency, I wish I had a clue. I really don't.
Yeah. Well, I met Brandon at actually camp a couple of years ago. He was actually eating at the Hibachi Steakhouse right next to our table, and at the time, the pitching coach, who's now with the Nationals, now his name is killing me. God, who I'm forgetting his name for whatever reason, but he was one of my coaches with Tank. And he actually brought him over, and we took some photos with him. Nicest kid, nicest young guy in the world. And the best thing about him, which is what I always love, he's playing a kid's game, and he's always got a smile on his face.
He's playing it like a kid.
Exactly, and he's always got that smile on his face,
and he always will.
And that's the one thing that I love about, whether he's in a slump, whatever he's doing. Yeah. And the funny thing is, I've actually noticed, because my son and I obviously watch a lot of the games, and he watches even games when I can't. I've watched him pattern some of what he does as a lefty after what Nimmo does. Like when he walks, he literally takes off of first, sprints down to first base. I'm like, I think I know where you got that from.
Yeah.
So, which is great. You know, they're emulating their idols, if you will. So, anyway, so Terry, definitely we appreciate you coming on. Normally we end our podcast with a rapid fire round.
Okay,
and normally some of the rapid fire rounds sometimes comes around silly stuff and things of that nature. But we're when I always have a coach or somebody from baseball on, I kind of try to put it around baseball. So,
okay.
Are you ready for the rapid fire there, Terry?
I'm ready to go.
All right, here we go. So, I'm going to start off with the toughest one, because you've been in both, AL or NL?
NL.
NL. Okay, great. Pitch clock or no pitch clock?
Pitch clock.
Okay. I think in fantasy camp, we need to put a pitch clock on Squirrel as well. So, but you know, him and Trax, I'm shocked that they've never been on the same team, because they both slower than slow. But anyway, I digress. DH or no DH?
No DH.
Okay. Shift or no shift?
Shift.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about that too. And last but not least, what was the last one I had? I had another one that was halfway decent. Now, as the expression goes, the gray hair is starting to come in. It's either that or the amount of drinking I did during camp. I can't figure out which one it was. Might have been a combination of the both. But I can't remember the last one. But anyways, we definitely appreciate you coming down to camp. Obviously, it's always been a fun time. Especially to have former players and former managers such as yourself. The only question that I would have for you is, how much do you think that camp would have an effect on the current players? Meaning, do you think any current players would ever think about trying to come down to camp?
George, that is one of the great questions. So I'm going to start out by saying, you know what, I don't get to talk to Steve Cohen much, but I will tell you, you're absolutely right. I think Steve Cohen knew the impact it would make PR-wise. You know, the Mets have been beaten up for years in the press. To have Steve Cohen walking in, come in for a day, come at night and do the
banquet
court.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't have to be on the field all day. I think it'd be huge. I think it'd be huge to bring a player in. You've got, you know, the best pitcher in baseball who's 2 hours up the road. You know what? Have him come down, spend an afternoon just to talk to, say hi, give a little talk to the, you know, and just to show the fan base, look, we appreciate you. We think the world of you, and thank you for all the support you give the Mets. I think it'd be great for them. And I think that's got to be something that certainly the PR department needs to work on a little bit in the future.
Okay, great. And again, one of the things that I always want to do is, listen, we always give Doug Dickey the absolute credit that Doug deserves. He does a phenomenal job in the camp. But the group of people that I really don't want to leave out, because they are working with Doug to help us have a great camp, are the clubbies with Mully over there and my buddy Chilo and Pinky's son, as well as the training staff of Vanessa, as well as the catering. all of those people that helped put on fantasy camp and helped Doug put on one of the best camps, as far as I'm concerned, in Major League Baseball. So we definitely won't want to leave any of those people out, because they are definitely part of, as the expression goes, the straw that stirs the drink for the rest of us.
That's right.
And there is a lot of drinking that also goes on at that camp as well. So, anyways. So Terry, we definitely appreciate you. I don't want to potentially hold you up from your tea time, because it becomes a problem down in Florida with all the snowbirds coming down to play some golf. So we definitely appreciate you coming on the podcast and coming, and hopefully we'll get you back on again sometime.
Sounds great, man. Take care. Have a great holiday.
Thanks, Terry. Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to the Gripe Session. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.